Sego, I'm Dale Montour. In the late 1960s, the oppression was great, the racism greater, and the conditions deplorable for all Aboriginal people. The Government of Canada and its bureaucracy had an easy excuse in not addressing Aboriginal concerns. There was no national body to deal with, and no one group which spoke on behalf of all Indian people. In August of 1970, the National Indian Brotherhood was formed. It was developed to serve the needs of the status Indians, to provide a unified voice, and to work towards finding solutions to the problems facing Aboriginal people. On today's show, we're going to trace the evolution of this organization to its present state as the Assembly of First Nations.
One of the founding members of the National Indian Brotherhood is a former chief of this community, Gunawage, which is part of the Mohawk Nation. Andrew DeLille remembers very well how it all started and why.
The organization was formed to represent the Native people across the country in its concerns towards the federal government. Many years, each individual group was representing itself, and one of the problems was that the government always threw back at us the fact that there were many other Indian people in Canada they had to deal with. So the solution was to get all the other Indian people together and make a one voice. Because a good example of that is that when I was chosen chief here, they told me, well, there's other Indians in Quebec, so we formed an association in Quebec. And when we formed the association, well, they said there's other Indians in Canada. So that consequently, it follows that we formed a national organization so that the government couldn't make that negative response.
When you formed the organization in 1970, who decided who the membership was going to be, and where did the first meeting take place?
Well, it started before 70. I guess in the early 60s, there was an organization which was formed. It was called the National Indian Council. The first meeting was called in Winnipeg, and all chiefs were called together. I remember going to collect the chiefs in Quebec to take them to that meeting. National Indian Council was formed under the leadership of William Whitney, who was elected the first president, and then eventually became Walter Dieter. And then from that, because of the name specifying that it was just a council of people, it was a discussion as to what it should be called. And then the idea of National Indian Brotherhood came about. And all these people, which were chiefs active in working together from across the country, and at that point in time, it wasn't all the chiefs of the country, but a few chiefs who were really active, and we decided to form a National Indian Brotherhood, in other words, in saying that the real interpretation as Indians do, brothers working together to resolve their problems. So that's how it started.
At the time of its formation, the government's treatment of Aboriginal people was less than humane. The First Peoples of Canada weren't allowed to vote until 1960. Residential schools were still in full operation. Housing conditions were deplorable, and there was practically no land base for economic development.
Andrew, what was the social and economic conditions of Indian people at that time when the organization was first formed?
Well, it was pretty dreary, because, again, as an example, when I start traveling around Indian country in our respective area, I found a lot of problems, lack of housing, abuse by governmental people in the sense that people weren't getting what they should be getting by way of services, health, and otherwise. The rape of the land, people were living in areas, for instance, where they weren't even allowed to use the trees to build houses, and they were living in dilapidated canvas tents. And then the restrictions, again, by government on their hunting and fishing, in spite of the fact that everybody said, oh, Indians have the right to hunt and fish at their leisure, and this was not the case. So it was really something, an eye-opener when the leadership, the potential leadership of the Indian community start traveling around their own respective areas and finding all these problems that existed. And then
the National Indian Brotherhood was incorporated in September of 1970, with 11 representatives from across the country becoming the founding members. And these were the Brotherhood's objectives: to assist the Indian people and to work towards a solution of problems facing the Indian people, to operate as a national body and to disseminate information, to study, in conjunction with representatives from various parts of Canada, the problems confronting them, and to make representation to the government and other organizations on behalf of the Indians, to assist in retaining the Indian culture and values, to act as national spokesman for the Indians throughout Canada. Those first years were difficult ones. The members of the organization had to travel using their own funds, and consequently, they had a hard time getting together. I asked Andrew what it was they talked about back then, and if they should have done anything different.
We had a lot of, as you say, a lot of technical problems in formal meetings, in the sense of translations, in the sense of people getting there, in the sense of subject matter, because everybody had a priority, you know, at the meetings. And I think a lot of the important feelings came out at other than the formal meeting, you know, after in the room of a hotel or even in a bar or a restaurant. And those are discussions I remember well, because everyone was talking about what we're talking about today, you know, sovereignty in the words used at that time, and self-determination, and everybody wanted something the best for their people, and everybody wanted to make the decision, be able to control the lives of their people, in the sense that, or their people control their own lives. Everybody had a strong sense of culture and spiritual value, which was expressed, but it never came out at the formal meetings, you know, because it was, I think we were scared, because at a lot of our formal meetings that we had, we always had governmental representations. And I think if there's something that we'd done, which we shouldn't have done, is we try to imitate their method of running meetings. You know, we try to use their language, and we shouldn't have done that.
The name of the organization has changed, and so have its leaders. Coming up, a conversation with the former National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, George Erasmus.
Basically, the history that Canadian schools project has never been accurate. So a lot of what we find ourselves doing is going around doing public speaking, or else using occasions, whatever it is, whether it's speaking to a Senate committee or a standing committee. We're having to basically go through a historical educational process, and basically educating mature adults on history.
Next on Aboriginal Voices.
If you're between 50 and 75, Norwich Union will insure you for life with no medical exam or health questions.
Even with my heart condition, I didn't need a medical to be insured.
And they didn't ask us any health questions.
Your guaranteed life insurance can cost as little as $20 a month. Depending on your age and the premium you choose, you could be covered for up to $25,000. And in case of a fatal accident, your benefit triples up to $75,000.
With the guaranteed life insurance plan, I'll have the affordable protection I need, and my premiums will never go up.
Call this number now for your free personal enrollment kit. You're under no obligation, and no salesperson will visit. If you're between 50 and 75, you're automatically approved with no medical exam. Just call 1-800-263-9899. An operator is standing by to take your call right now. That's 1-800-263-9899. Ask for operator 432.
Here at Emerson High, Bill Miller's made quite a name for himself, both as coach and as head of the home ec department. Bill knows that reducing saturated fat is part of cooking sensibly. Pam cooking spray is an ingredient that's low in saturated fat. For sauteed vegetables.
Way to work, Chang.
For muffins.
Looking good, guys.
And even for broiled chicken.
Good. Now move those legs.
When you're cooking with Pam, you're cooking sensibly.
Now that's teamwork. Yeah!
In this building is the main office of the Assembly of First Nations in Ottawa. The name of the national body representing status Indians has changed. The language used to address issues has changed, but the problems facing Aboriginal people haven't. I spoke with George Erasmus, former chief of the Assembly of First Nations, about his 2 terms in office from 1985 to 1991.
In the early 1980s, there was a movement to restructure the National Indian Brotherhood so that it would be more representative of the Aboriginal communities from across the country. The Assembly of First Nations was born out of that movement and became a chiefs-based organization.
But what we now reflect is 633 elected chiefs in the country. They are the basic power base of the organization. They meet in assembly at least annually once, but most times we meet at least a second, sometimes in a special circumstance, a third time a year. Then we have a middle level of authority or management, and that is a special confederacy of chiefs, which primarily has regional tribal leaders and chiefs that are appointed by their tribal leaders. Then we have a national executive of vice chiefs, regionally appointed all across the country or elected by their chiefs, and one national chief.
George Erasmus is from the Dene Nation in the Yukon. Born in 1948, he started his politicking at a very early age. He was chief of the Dene Nation from 1976 to 1983, northern vice chief for the Assembly of First Nations from 1983 to 1985, and national chief from 1985 to 1991. When he became leader, he had some very clear goals to accomplish, namely amending the Constitution, ridding the organization of a crippling debt, and giving the Assembly of First Nations a higher profile. I asked him if, after 6 years, he felt those goals had been achieved.
If you look back now and see if I accomplished them, I guess some have accomplished, others, I haven't completely fulfilled. As far as the Constitution goes, we never got the kind of amendments we wanted, but we felt good walking away from it because we didn't lose anything, because we could have actually had constitutional amendments that would have undermined our native sovereignty, or would have affected title in the country and so forth. So we felt reasonably good March of '87 when we walked away from the constitutional process. Financially, we're now fairly sound. We've got the deficit completely removed. We have a small surplus of about $130,000 or something. So we're in good shape that way. The other thing I wanted to do was to make this organization significant to the country and to our people by unifying our people and then making the organization unavoidable by the government. And I think that's been achieved, but certainly I can't take credit for it as an individual. It's been a number of things we've all done across the country, including the Mohawk people last summer, both the two communities of Ganawagi and Kansataki, and then the supportive rallies all across the country. Plus, of course, the 3 years of public attention trying to change Meech, and then finally last summer, the Native leaders through Elijah collectively saying, well, we can't change this, we have to stop it.
What George faced when he became national chief was in fact social and economic situations paralleling the early 1970s. A life expectancy for Aboriginal people 10 years less than the national level, a suicide rate 3 times that of the national average, 1/3 of his people on social assistance, and a backlog of on-reserve housing that would require 5 years to overcome at double the construction rate. To Native leaders, the reasons behind this dismal reality weren't very hard to figure out. Native people did not have an economic base, and for years they had been isolated and politically dependent, with the government reinforcing that dependence through ineffective social programs.
Well, the problem is all of our issues demand attention yesterday and 20 years ago. I mean, we have things like, appalling need to address the situation on housing. I mean, we must be 20,000 units or more short today. That should be built today. And that's not for the families that are going to be created in the next year by our young people coming together and forming new families. And with the youth bubble that we have that's moving up, from 15 to 16 to 20, to beginning at the point where they're coming out of school and getting married and starting to have children, the reality is our social problems are absolutely demanding attention right now. But we know that every time we try and get into any one of the social problems, we hit the same problem. Until we have jurisdiction in that area, we can't do anything.
In 1991, Mr. Erasmus decided not to run again. His reason? Some very needed time off.
Well, the reason I decided not to run again was to take a break, to relax, reflect. I've been in an elected position like this since 1975. And prior to that, for 7 years, I'd been involved in community organizing work, which had me traveling all of the time. So I've been on the road for just about 22 years. And what I wanted to do was give myself a sabbatical, if you wish, an opportunity to actually just step back and just reflect.
Mr. Erasmus's sabbatical lasted less than 2 months. He was appointed co-chairman of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples in August of 1991. The most recent election of the Assembly of First Nations was on June 12, 1991. There were 6 candidates: Bill Montour, Neil Sterrett, Mike Mitchell, Bill Fontaine, Bill Wilson, and Ovid Mercredi. Never in the AFN's history had there been so many. Mainly because Aboriginal people were finally on the national agenda, the media coverage of the election was unprecedented. The race came down to 2 candidates, Bill Fontaine and Ovid Mercredi. After 4 full ballots and a 60% majority which the AFN charter demands, Ovid Mercredi emerged as the new national chief. I spoke to Ovid the day after the election.
Under your leadership, what do you hope to achieve during your 3-year term?
The goals for the organization is to build a strong movement of people. Now, I'm not talking about just using the political mandate that I have as national chief to do things for people. I'm talking about involving people, and that would include people from the communities, technicians, youth, women, and chief and councils. Because the way to produce power, I think, is to involve people, right? So that's what I'd like to do is develop unity through issues by dealing with the issues as they come forward. And it may be the Constitution tomorrow, it might be treaties the next day, for example, or it might be child welfare the following day. But the important thing is that as the issues surface and appear important for that period of time, you try to build a strong movement on that particular one, and you create unity by dealing with that issue.
The present structure under AFN right now does not allow for people at the community level to vote. How do you propose to make changes to that structure to allow that to happen?
Well, I think we have to. If the organization is going to be in touch with the developments that are happening in terms of shifting of thinking from Indian Act to more inherent traditional approaches of self-government. So AFN has to reflect the time, and so obviously there would have to be some structural change. It would be impractical to open it up to all the people in terms of the assembly, but I think we can have representation, a broader base of representation of elected political leaders and traditional leaders. In addition to that, we can open up the vote for the national chief and make it available for all Indian people, not just the ones living on reserves, but those living in the cities as well. That would be a goal of mine in terms of the end of my term is that the next election would be by popular vote of all Indians living on or off the reserve.
Ovid Mercredi is a Cree and was born in the community of Grand Rapids, Manitoba. His community practiced a traditional lifestyle of hunting and fishing for survival. In 1969, Manitoba Hydro started construction on a hydroelectric project which destroyed his community's way of life.
In 1969, Manitoba Hydro decided to build a dam in my community. And by building a dam in my community, that means they had to destroy the rapids completely. And by flooding land, they flooded the Indian land. And the effect of that was to destroy the trap line completely. And that meant part of our traditional way of life was finished. It was done for, never to be resumed, see? And the impact of the hydro dam was to also adversely affect the fishing industry, so that a community that was self-sufficient could not remain self-sufficient because of the hydro project. And what I saw was people changing their attitudes about themselves, their feelings about themselves, because we had a white system of government that moved in and took over completely. And the authority of the chief and council was completely ignored and eliminated in the decision-making of the project, or for that matter, the rule of law in the community, so to speak. So I saw many of the men and the women, losing their self-respect. And it was also the beginning of family problems, and juvenile delinquency, a lot of alcoholism. And a community that was very united and very comfortable with itself began to deteriorate.
It was this feeling of powerlessness that all Aboriginal people have experienced in the face of development and at many other levels, which gradually formed the basis of Ovid's policy of nonviolent civil disobedience. If it is morally justified and all other democratic channels have been exhausted, civil disobedience is the right choice. In fact, he says, it is their right.
The general reason that we all have in Northern Ontario or Northern Manitoba or in Northern Quebec is the right to life. Every human group has a right to life. It's enshrined in international law. It's right there in black and white. And if people's right to life is being threatened, they have a right to resist that threat to their right to life. See? Because if you destroy people's economy, like what happened in my community, you destroy their chances for a happy life. You see? You diminish their opportunities, right? And you create for them a negative lifestyle, as opposed to, say, a lifestyle where where there's joy. And I'd say our people have a right to be happy too, right? Why should we be the only sad people in Canada?
Aboriginal people have been saying it for decades. Live up to your treaties, give back to Native people land that is rightfully theirs, and entrench our inherent right to self-determination in the Constitution. The Canadian government, with its recent proposals for constitutional change, said that Aboriginal self-government should be a reality within 10 years. Aboriginal leaders, although thankful self-government is actually on the agenda, feel that 10 years is too long. After all, they aren't asking for self-determination to be given to them. They just want a right they have never given up to be recognized.
But from our perspective, there's no reason why you and I, as Aboriginal people, should spend 20 to 30 years of our lives fighting for justice. I would like to take a holiday, I would like to have a normal life. I would really enjoy recreation. I might have been a great poet, or maybe a great writer, if I had the opportunity for leisure time. But I have to devote my time to justice for ourselves and our people, you see. And I'm not alone. There's thousands of us, hundreds of thousands of us in the same position. And why should an entire society be fighting for justice when they could be just enjoying life?
Thank you for joining us. I'm Dale Montour. Onagiwahi, Dago de Dese.